My name's Don Weitz, and I am an anti-psychiatry activist.
My name is Mel Starkman. I call myself a psychiatric survivor activist.
My name is Capponi. I'm a psychiatric survivor. I've been in hospital about 7 times.
My name is David Reville, and in 1965 I started my moral career as a mental patient.
Okay, so my name is Louise. I was contacted by Eric Fabros about, I guess, younger people who are involved in psychiatric survivor, user and survivors of psychiatry in Toronto, basically.
Well, when I started doing this work, I began, well, I've been involved in the psych survivor community in Toronto for since 1990. I was about to say 90 years.
It only feels like that,
yes,
Jeff.
I meant 1990.
Hard to know where the story begins exactly, but I had no notion that I might be a candidate for mental health services until I got there.
I have been in the mental health system since about 1966, and I have been incarcerated. I use the term incarcerated, which is a strong term, but I haven't been incarcerated in various hospitals over long periods of time, and through the basically through the intervention of a lot of good friends of mine, I came out of hospital, and I've been active in the anti-psychiatry movement for since about 1981.
In fact, I found my main source of support was in the community, so going out to different groups, and I also wanted, more importantly, to be involved because I had read Phoenix Rising from about the mid-80s. I first saw it when I was in Windsor before I came to Toronto at an alternative bookstore. Oh, a magazine put out by psych patients. I was amazed, so I thought that was great. So I wanted to get more involved in finding out about the activism.
I later found out, but not from the psychiatrist who treated me, schizophrenia. 6 weeks after admission, they started me, Dr. Douglas Sharp, my doctor, started me on a series of insulin subcoma shock treatments without fully explaining to me what it was all about. At that time, I didn't know what informed consent was. This is over 50 years ago. Of course, even if I had, it wouldn't have mattered because they had this power. They could rationalize any forced treatment they imposed on me. And it was force. It was force. And I wrote up my experiences, as you may have read about them, as psychiatric torture. Being on subcoma insulin was one of the worst experiences in my life because I suffered almost daily, and I mean daily for the next 6 weeks. The explanation was, whatever explanation was, that it would, one of these general blanket explanations, well, it's a treatment that will help you. But I didn't know what the hell I was being treated for because I always denied, in fact, I never admitted that I was mentally ill in the first place. I was just a confused adolescent.
The real challenges, like the material challenges of working from within an institution to try and affect change. Change in terms of patient voice, in terms of client rights, in terms of trying to articulate just living and being in the world beyond just being, I guess, categorized and articulated through just language of psychiatry and contemporary mental health.
Ended up in a Parkdale, West Toronto Parkdale boarding home, because if you keep going back enough, they call you chronic. And there were 70 people in that boarding home, and it was Dickensian environment. And it was through meeting those 70 people and through trying to understand how there could be such a poor house on a main street in Toronto got me. I said to myself I would devote a couple of years to trying to fix things.
We were trying to teach people about their rights. One of the things we discovered was that if you're a roomer and a boarder, you don't really have any rights because they were not protected by the Landlord-Tenant Act. So they weren't tenants. So they could be evicted without notice and without cause. And they were all the time. And we called those garbage bag evictions because the landlord would enter your premises, put all your stuff in a garbage bag, put it on the curb, and you'd come back and your key didn't work.
They were excluded behind these walls, and so I think we can all identify with them in that sense. And so I think a lot of it is the way in which people were totally forgotten, shunned, isolated, ostracized. And so I think a lot of people can identify with that. And also those brick walls that people know and see and can actually feel. If you can't see them, but you can feel them. I think that says enormous amount. People can look at those walls and think of them like these walls over here, and you just pass them by and you don't think anything of them. And then you look at them and say, oh, wait a minute, there's some story behind there I hadn't thought about. I wandered by them for years, and there's those walls speak about people who actually lived behind them, built them, died behind them.
But I was coerced into this situation, forced, and I went along, well, I was rebelling even in the open sanitarium before they put me into the closed institution of McLean, the psycho prison, which I prefer to call it. Yeah, I never believed I was just mixed up, for God's sake, like many other people in this world, especially if you're young. You know, what else is new? So, and for that, at that time, if you were openly angry, mind you, I hadn't committed or charged with any criminal offense, because I was openly showing my anger or my resentment to authorities for one reason or another, for God's sake. That was considered a symptom of mental illness.
I started getting involved in the 90s because it just felt that, as I said, I wanted to just to get more involved in the community, people I thought would not be judgmental, first of all, and also politically I very much support what they are doing around civil rights, and I was very inspired by seeing what the work that many people had been doing, challenging the discrimination that had been going on and being public, as that really impressed me.
Vocational rehabilitation people had got me a job in the kitchen of the girls' residence at Queen's University. So I was a pot washer, and the message I took from that was that my aspirations needed to be adjusted downward quite drastically. And then I also experienced all that kind of social isolation that sometimes happens for people once they've been labeled and treated.
Some articulations of madness, or like mad identity, which is basically expressing something beyond the medical model in psychiatry. Sometimes it's risked being really disembodied, potentially, or just negligent of, let me just think, like institutional happenings.
That was when I first met with Don Weitz and what's her name, Carla McCaig, and other people like that, and the people in On Our Own, and that turned me around. They had an open space there that they used, and this was about a year and a half after On Our Own it was 4 years after On Our Own it got started, and they had a meeting, and I was feeling really good. I was feeling really good. And I went into the meeting, and suddenly they were talking about things like political issues that I felt akin to, very much akin to. And it was a very open and honest discussion. And I really got involved. And then I got, I got involved with the Phoenix Rising. And I started to write for the Phoenix Rising.
The most exciting part was starting Phoenix Rising, which was wanted to have something more substantial in publication that was seriously critical of the system and yet was very empowering for people, and that was that was very anti-psychiatric, that told our own stories from our own perspective.
Because there was a lot of fear, and justifiable, that if you did anything, if you complained about your home, they would take you back into hospital, or you would be cut off welfare, or So I had to show that I could do these things and nobody would get me. So it was going first. That's a principle of leadership that I teach. That you got to go first. You got to show. So when they saw that I was still, like in the early days, trying to get guys downstairs at Park to talk to reporters was impossible. Right? It was just now after we go a few times, we couldn't shut them up. But you had to show that you could do it and not get killed.
I think it's so important to think about like agency, just like the ways in which we can find ways to feel empowered. I think that's important. Like particularly if you're I think many people get entrenched in psychiatry as users when they're younger. Unfortunately, alternatives aren't really that prominent. That's how I kind of got entangled in sort of psychiatric type services. So yeah, alternatives are really important. I think that's something a message I want to send to high school students.
For me, it was always, the fight isn't so much located in the hospital anymore. The fight is out in the community.
You know that I study the consumer survivor movement as part of my academic work. And I am just astounded at how mature the movement is here in Toronto and the impact it's had on public policy. And it really does need to be more celebrated than it is. It's really quite extraordinary. We all get that. All of us psychiatric survivor activists who are open about having a mental illness
ended up
because my father had a lung cancer, and I had never seen any benefit. I was
to say that, and then